Hi, I'm Chris Foley. I'm the Assistant Vice President and Director for Online Education. And I'm here today with...
I'm Sharon Wobble, and I'm Associate Director for Decision Support and Reporting for the Office of Online Education.
Today, we want to take a few minutes to give a presentation about debunking some online myths about the quality of students and their participation in online education that we have here at Indiana University. So I'm going to give a little overview of online education at the university, and then Sharon will provide some more data-oriented facts about how students are involved in online education here at IU. So first, let me give you an overview. First, as I noted before, we're going to do a little bit about online education. We're going to talk about why talking about quality is important. The IU Online model, which is a little different than what we see out there at our peer institutions. And then we'll talk a little bit about how we got here, talk basically a timeline. Then we're going to go right into myth busting, or not busting, because some of them may not. I'll give you a little suspense there. Some of them may not be busted. But we're going to look at student participation in the online space, online student success, and then online course completion. And then we'll talk a little bit about wrapping up and next steps that we will be pursuing in looking at these topics and others. So to talk a little bit about online education here at Indiana University. First, the Office of Online Education is really to provide a very student-centered approach to online education and ensuring student success. It is a very collaborative approach, which means that we try to be inclusive and work across multiple campuses and ensure that everybody who can participate in online education is able to participate in online education. And then we like to make sure that it's very faculty driven as well. So our online education is very much focused on being anchored in the departments and schools and academic programs that already exist here within the university. We aren't trying to separate those out into a separate entity or unit. So that all means that we encounter a lot of faculty perceptions about online education as well as administrative perceptions. And so two sources of outside review of just general impressions of online education are listed here. The first one is the online report card. And we see here that 29% of chief academic officers believe their faculty accept the value and legitimacy of online education. That's a pretty small percentage in general. That's less than a third. So we have some work to do in developing confidence in online education amongst faculty. The other one that is out there is the doubts about data, the 2016 survey of faculty attitudes on technology. Faculty members are still worried that online education can't deliver outcomes equivalent to face-to-face instruction. And so one of the things that's really nice about the Indiana University model is that because it's basically entrenched in the face-to-face mission just as much as it is in the online mission, we can do comparisons across face-to-face students and online students and really make a determination about how equivalent that education is or is not. So a little bit more about the model that we have here at Indiana University. When we were looking at the landscape of online education, there were really 5 different models. You could create a separate online campus with its own courses, its own faculty, its own admissions process, advising, billing, reporting, the whole thing. It could basically be a self-contained entity. We did not pursue that because it would be duplicating much of what already happens here at the university. It would also be a very complicated endeavor. And so because of those complexities and because we really wanted to ensure that we were utilizing the resources we had and being efficient about how we delivered it, creating that online campus was not an option. We could subcontract out online education to a third-party vendor. However, that would come at a significant cost. Usually those vendors require about 40 to 60% of any tuition generated from online education, as well as there's issues of intellectual property in that they oftentimes claim ownership over anything that is developed for those courses. In the model that we have developed, we keep the majority of the tuition. It goes through to the academic units or to the campuses in the normal process, so there isn't a loss of tuition, and intellectual property is retained according to university policy for faculty and the university. The third model would be to allow every department, program, school, campus to pursue its own versions of online education. This would create basically a Wild West approach. And we've certainly seen this in other institutions, and what it leads to is increased competition amongst campuses, and then also a real set of winners or losers. And that is what we are trying to avoid, is competition amongst the campuses, and we want to find a win-win solution. Finally, of the other models that we did not choose is we could designate a single campus to implement online education for the entire university. This again would create one winner and multiple losers. And we also see that when this is implemented at other universities, this tends to break down because those other campuses that are excluded tend to decide that they want to play in online education later on, and so they have to deal with the idea of expanding it anyway. The model we chose was really one that was defined by Barb Bickelmeyer, who was a former faculty member here at Indiana University, so the credit goes to her. And we feel like it's a very strong model. It's one where we work to develop these collaborative programs. So let's say we have a degree in economics, and we then go out and we ask which of the campuses want to participate in this degree, and how many of them can participate in this degree. And so then we bring the campuses together to talk about what that degree should include. We provide some market analysis from the Office of Online Education to help inform that. And then we design courses that can be shared and delivered across multiple campuses. So even though a student may be enrolled through one campus in particular, in another way, think of it as they're a citizen of one campus, but they can cross borders and take advantage of the courses available at other campuses as well. And so we really feel like this has allowed us to leverage the expertise that already exists within the university and share the benefits of online education. It also allows us, because it's ingrained in the broader educational mission here at Indiana University, to make better comparisons between students in face-to-face programs and online programs to help ensure quality. So as I've already noted, this is a collaborative structure that incorporates faculty across 7 campuses, and it is to deliver both online courses and degrees. We also have students who enroll in face-to-face programs can still take advantage of online courses. So one of the things we're going to talk about is how many of our what we would consider our traditional student population, those students who come to our campuses and take advantage of our classrooms and our student unions and things like that, how many of them are still taking advantage of online education? And we see that there's a fair amount of crossover. And then we also develop the courses within the current faculty setting. So when we get asked questions about quality, we already know that the same quality that we use to ensure coursework in our face-to-face classrooms is going to be essentially the same process that we begin looking at when we develop online coursework. So how do we get to where we are now in 2017? So this started in 2012 when the Office of Online Education was started. We started having to first, in order to even count students and study their enrollment patterns, we had to define what they were. So we had to define what distance education was. We had to define and get codes for online program plans, which in PeopleSoft is essentially the equivalent to a major. And then we had to even go further and define what online distance education courses. So that was the first year. The second year was starting to implement and train faculty and staff on how to go about making that coding work and making sure that students were coded appropriately. Oftentimes these coding definitions can have impacts on the student's life. So whether or not they're eligible for student services or whether or not they pay a certain rate of tuition or not. So there's a significant amount of reasons why we have to pay attention to this, not just for the reporting aspect as well. For programs, we have different definitions between what the Indiana Commission for Higher Education defines as a distance education class versus what the Higher Learning Commission does. And you can see that it's anywhere from 80 to 99% for ITCHE and 50 to 70% for HLC. And so we had to come up with our own definition there, as well as the same thing for defining different types of courses, which Sharon will talk about later because she breaks out some of the statistics in those categories. And so this really allows us to look at student success across many different perspectives. So as far as students, we can look at how they utilize online education in their schedule configuration. So whether or not they have one or more online class, whether or not they are in all online classes, whether or not they have no online classes, and whether or not there's some combination in between. And then finally, we can look and see of those students, not just about how they consume online education in their schedules, but which ones of those are actually in online programs and how their performance might differ between students who are not in online programs but take advantage of online classes. So let me, at this point, transition it over to Sharon, and she can start walking us through some of these myths.
So let's start to talk through just a couple of the myths that we've heard a lot from faculty, and this one is very, very common. We hear a lot of faculty say, well, my students really don't want online classes. My traditional undergraduates who are here on campus, they don't want online education and they're not interested in that space. It's mostly for graduate students and for part-time students. So what we want to do first of all is take a look at our student participation in the online space. So now we'll get into some nice data and take a look at our first series of charts. We're going to focus on the number of students in each term who are taking one or more online classes. And what you can see in this chart, we go all the way from the fall of 2009 to fall of 2016 to look at the number of students who are participating in that space. And you can see we have a 123% increase in the students participating in at least one or more online classes in a given term to almost 27,000 students in the fall of 2016. On this chart, and I'll be consistent throughout the rest of the presentation, you can see I'm breaking up our students too into three primary demographics between our two core campuses, the Bloomington campus and the IUPUI campus in Indianapolis, and our 5 regional campuses across the state. The demographics for students in each of those 3 areas are slightly different, so it's helpful to look at students broken out in that manner. So you can see our Bloomington campus will be in the crimson. I'll always reference our Indianapolis campus in the cream, and the regionals are noted in the blue. The one thing I want you to see from this data first off is that the number of students participating in the online space is not subject to the typical fluctuations that we see between fall and spring semesters. Usually there's a drop in enrollment from the fall term to the spring term, and we recover that back as we go to the following fall. And that's not the case with online. We see just increasing participation overall by these students. The other thing I want to point out is the fall 2012 IU Online Initiative, when President McRobbie provided an infusion of funds to help us lead and manage online education at the university. And we can see steeper increases in these numbers of students, I think as a direct result of that initiative. Now, if we start to break out, instead of by campus, if we break out these numbers of students taking one or more online classes between undergraduate and graduate, my undergraduate students are in the crimson, and we can see increasing participation from the upper 70% in the fall of 2009 to a little over 80% of the students who take one or more online classes at the undergraduate level are at the undergraduate level, and our graduate students are the remainder, just under 20%. And then when we look at the breakout by full-time and part-time, we can see also increasing participation by full-time students as well. Now when we break the students out by the type of program that they're in, whether they're in an on-campus or an online program, we can also see that the vast majority of the students taking one or more online classes are actually in on-campus programs. And on this particular slide, those are shown in the crimson bars. We do break out our online programs here at the university in between those that are fully online, those that are 80% or more online, and those that we reference now as hybrid programs, 50 to 79% online. And you can see those breakouts at the top, but truly the vast majority of the students taking one or more online classes are undergraduates, they're full-time, and they're in on-campus plans.
And if I can say one thing about that particular slide there, one of the areas that we have on our radar that we want to definitely take advantage of with the Office of Online Education is promoting those online programs. So even while we want to see the students taking advantage of online classes, even if they're in face-to-face courses, we understand and I'm pleased to see that that percentage continues to grow, but we want to continually emphasize the growth of students, particularly undergraduates, in online programs.
Great. Now let's take a look at students with fully online schedules. So of course these numbers are slightly smaller, but what you see here represented in this chart is the same breakout that we started with, and this is the number of students whose entire class schedules were in online classes from the fall of 2009 to the fall of 2016. And you can see over 150% increase in this number of students. And again, the breakouts between Bloomington, our Indianapolis campus, and the regionals. When we look at this, these students with fully online schedules, we can see increasing participation by undergraduates in general. And we also see increasing participation by students who are full-time. In terms of the students that are taking fully online schedules, the vast majority are part-time students, and they do tend to be graduate students, but we are seeing increasing participation by full-time undergraduate students as well.
And one thing that I would say about these particular types of students is that they're, as you've already noted, they're not just students in online programs. These are students in fully online schedules. So these could include your student who started as a freshman in your brick and mortar classrooms, but then decided that for whatever reason, convenience, work schedules, things along family obligations, they needed to be able to cobble together an online schedule for their life. And so this is another area where online education has enabled students to stay enrolled, make progress towards completion of their degree, and take advantage of a mode of education that helps them do all of those things. And in prior times, they might not have been able to continue to make progress towards their degree.
Absolutely. Next, what we're looking at here is this breakout of students with fully online schedules, and as expected, you can see in the data, about 60% of the students who have fully online schedules are enrolled in an actual online program. Again, those are students that are shown in the fully online programs in the blue, and the programs that are 80% to 99% online shown in the cream. But we still do have students putting together fully online schedules who are in on-campus programs for whatever reason. For scheduling purposes, maybe in a particular term they have work or family obligations, or just as a matter of convenience, they choose to put together a full-time online schedule. Now I've rotated the data a little bit differently now, and in each of these bars what we're looking at is the students broken out by the type of schedule that they're taking. So on the left you see university-wide, all of the students at Indiana University's 7 campuses, broken out by those students who are not taking any online classes, those with partial online schedules, so those students who have some online and some on-campus classes, and then in the crimson we have those students that are taking all online classes. And what we can see over on the right, we've broken out by those 3 campus types, our Bloomington campus, our Indianapolis campus, and our regional campuses, and you can see a dramatic difference in terms of participation in the online space. At the regional campuses and at IUPUI, you can see over a third of the students taking 1 or more online classes, either those full online schedules or those partial online schedules. And now, if we take fall 2016, to orient you to this particular slide, again, what we have on the 2 bars on the left are my Bloomington campus. In the middle, we have IUPUI. On the right, we have our regionals. And now I've broken out each of those campuses into undergraduate and graduate students. And again, you can start to see the difference in the profiles of these students. The online students at the Bloomington campus with those full online schedules are in that graduate student space. But what we see at IUPUI and at the regional campuses is those students with those full and partial online schedules there's a much bigger percentage at the undergraduate level than there are at the graduate level. So it's interesting to look at the demographics here by career. And if we break out by full-time and part-time, that's even more interesting that we see for the most part at the Bloomington campus, we have our students with all online schedules. They are part-time students by a dramatic percentage. But if we look at IUPUI and the regionals, we see much more students at the full-time level taking 1 or more online classes as part of their schedule. And this is an interesting demographic to look at. We see students here broken out by age. Again, each campus, Bloomington to the left, IUPUI in the center, and my regionals to the right. And each column breakout within those campuses is an age range, starting with students that are less than 20 years old, going to the right up to students that are 40 or older. And you can see our traditional Bloomington campus following that very traditional age range. So the students that are graduate students taking all online schedules that are in the 40 or over category really mark that demographic for Bloomington. But those bars kind of flatten out, and we see overall participation by a wide range of student ages at both the Indianapolis campus and at the regional campuses. So when we talk about, we have faculty that say, my traditional undergrads that are full-time and here on campus, they aren't interested in online classes. What we're seeing is really increased participation by those students in the online space for whatever reason. So I think we can fairly say that we've kind of busted that myth.
I think that's fairly easy to say.
Okay.
With 1 out of every 4 of our students across Indiana University being involved some way, some shape of online education, then certainly it's a growing portion of what's happening here. And the other thing that it's very clear that not just is that 1 out of every 4 across the university, but when you move into IUPUI and you move to the regionals, that proportion gets even bigger faster. And
Absolutely.
so the importance of online education to both online programs but also for their own face-to-face students is essential.
Absolutely. So let's continue with our second myth. So we can say a lot more students are participating in online, but now the faculty will say, or even administrators, there'll be concern from people saying, well, the students aren't as successful. They're taking those online classes, but it's not helping them. So let's take a look at a few qualities about student success. And we're going to look at numbers of credits taken and their GPAs, retention and graduation rates. And let's see what the data has to say about that. So here we are. This is, again, fall 2016. And what we're going to focus on now is undergraduate students only. Graduate students can kind of skew the results in terms of numbers of credits taken and their grades. So for the next few slides, we're going to look only at undergraduate students in the fall of 2016. And this slide shows us the the average number of credits the student took in the term. And what I've done again is break this out, if you look down the rows, by the Bloomington, IUPUI, and regional campuses. Across the columns, what I've done is separated the students by their online schedule type. Those students taking no online classes, those students to the far right taking all online classes, and then in the middle, we have these students that are taking some online but some on-campus classes in the same term. And what we can start to see are some dramatic differences in the average number of credits that these students take. So if we look at the Bloomington campus, for example, all students at Bloomington, the average number of credits that they took for undergraduates was 13.29 credits. If we look by schedule type, though, we can see that students with those partial online schedules took 15 credits on average. And so that's a 13% increase in the average number of credits those students took. At the regional campuses, the difference is even more dramatic. We can see the average regional student in the fall of 2016 at the undergraduate level took 10.17 credit hours, but when we look at those students with those partial online schedules, they almost took one whole class more, a 3 credit hour class more, with almost 13 credit hours per semester, which is a 27% increase.
And
Go
if
ahead.
I can
No,
interrupt for
please
just
do.
a moment,
Please do.
This has significant impacts for the student and for the university. The difference between, so for instance, if you were to look at those regional differences where a student who the average for all is at 10 credit hours, and then the average for schedule type, if it's partial online, is 12.91. That suddenly gets you closer to that magic 15 credit hours per semester, which is what's necessary in order for a student to complete an undergraduate degree in 4 years. It also means that they are qualified as full-time for financial aid purposes and other purposes across the university. So for us to be able to make that difference and for us as a university to offer the ability for students to utilize online education to make that leap from full-time, from part-time to full-time is pretty nice.
So let's look at our next metric, which is their average term GPA. And again, we're focusing on undergraduate students only. In this was in the spring 2016 term. And so I've broken again out between Bloomington, IUPUI, and the regionals, and by schedule type, where students had no online, partial online schedules, and all online schedules. When we look across the data here, I really didn't highlight a particular column that made a difference, because what we generally see is not a really big difference in the student GPA. And in fact, that's what we want to see. We want to know that the student experience in online is equivalent to the student experience in campus classes. So we appreciate and value that. And there may be a few, it looks like there's a slight dip in the regionals for those students with those partial online schedules, but really nothing that we see is significant.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we oftentimes hear from folks who are not quite certain about the quality of online education is they think that it's either too easy or students aren't dedicated to it. So if it were too easy, we would see inflated GPAs for the online courses, and if the students weren't dedicated, you would see lower GPAs. And so by seeing them right in line with what we would expect from our general population, that's a very good thing.
So now let's take a look at retention. So we took at students from in the fall 2015 semester, and we looked at their retention into the spring 2016 semester. And what you're seeing here on this particular chart, again, across the top we see our campuses: Bloomington, the Indianapolis campus, and the regional campuses. In the crimson, what you see are students that did retain to the next term. And across the bottom, I've broken out things by schedule type. Those students with no online classes, partial online classes, and all online classes. And you can see across the board in each type of campus, the retention rates were, they were much higher at Bloomington, well, much higher at the regional campuses, higher at the Bloomington campus, and just slightly higher at the Indianapolis campus. So what we saw in the data for our students was that those students with those partial online schedules, for whatever reason, had higher retention rates to the next term. And now let's look a little bit at graduation rates. Now these are a little bit more complicated to look at. To look at graduation rates for a student in a bachelor's degree program, we need to look at 6 years worth of data to be able to see the traditional official university graduation rate data deals with students graduating within 150% of the program length. So we looked at the fall 2009 cohort of full-time undergraduate beginning students, and we took the students in that population and added the official census credit hours that they took during the course of that academic career, and I divided them into online versus on-campus classes so that we could take a look at those students who had taken online classes as part of their overall degree and those students who didn't. And when we look at the data, the first thing you'll notice when you look at this particular slide, again, I've broken out between Bloomington, Indianapolis, and the regional campuses across the top. On the bottom, you can see I don't have that all online schedule category anymore. We used to have 3, the students with no online classes, partial online schedules, and all online schedules. Because we go all the way back to fall 2009 here, it's rare to find a student who took all of their classes online in that particular cohort, and the N was so small in that I eliminated that from this slide. But what we can see here, and what I have highlighted, again, in the crimson, that's the good result. Those are students who received their degree within 150% of the time it typically takes to complete the degree. And you can see that across the board at all campuses, those graduation rates were higher for those students who incorporated 1 or more online classes into their academic career. The rates at Indianapolis and the regionals are dramatically different. So these results are really interesting, and what we've been doing is doing a more detailed statistical analysis. This graduation rate data really begs the question of why is this so? Right here, all we're doing is describing what the data show, and now we want to look in more reasons. Perhaps it's only the smart students who take online classes, right, Chris?
Right.
But we need to do more analysis. It could be based upon their age or their backgrounds or their abilities. We want to look at this in more detail and see, did online really help them graduate at higher rates? What we're reporting here is just what the data show, and really more work needs to be done, and our office is continuing to do that.
And one thing that I would just also note is that it's not just interesting about the percentage of the students who are getting their degrees. Also, particularly at IUPUI and the regionals, look at the raw numbers. The vast majority of their graduates have been involved in online education in some way, shape, or form. Both of those categories, the numbers of students who are involved in 1 or more online hours at both IUPUI and the regionals, those raw numbers far exceed the numbers of graduates they had who did not take online hours.
So when we look at this myth, now I've lightened our busted logo across the top here, but I think that we can start to say we do see that online students who incorporate online classes into their degree programs, we know that they tend to take more average credit hours per term, We don't see much difference in their average GPAs, and we're seeing these higher retention and graduation rates. So certainly very interesting results, and more work needs to be done, and we plan to do that. Let's go look at our third myth, our third and final myth that we'll talk about. We'll get more specifically at those DFW rates, which is the most often quoted statistic by faculty. They want to know, what are those course completion rates comparing online to face-to-face courses? And so that's what this next series of slides will do. So what we have here is fall 2015, again looking at grade data. We went back to fall 2015 to look at official census corrected grades. This is undergraduate grades only, university-wide. And what we see here in the cream as the pass rate, and the DFW rate is in the crimson. And in this particular slide, I get the opportunity to tell you a little bit about how we code our online classes. We need to understand that a little bit to get to this particular data. The majority of the classes taught university-wide are in-person classes, and you can see those to the far left. The next category of classes that we have are what we call our traditional hybrids. These are classes where typically students will come to the classroom half of the time and then take the remainder of their classwork and perform that in an online asynchronous format. So kind of a 50-50 split between online and on campus. 100% online is the next category over, and those are our classes where the students primarily, they complete all of their classwork in a primarily asynchronous online format. The next category over is an interesting one. Those are 76 to 99% online classes. Those particular classes are ones where they're almost all online, except in those particular classes, the faculty require that the students come to campus to take a midterm and/or final exam, and sometimes they're required to come for an orientation or initial course experience at the beginning of the class. They might also have to come periodically for a presentation or a class experience. It can't be more than less than 76% delivered online, but for those courses where the students are required to come to campus just a couple of times a semester, we have a special category for those classes. Over to the right, we have two very special classes, and you can see the number of courses, the number of grades in these categories is relatively small. Live video courses are distance video courses. Those are taught primarily through synchronous live video, and we code those separately because students need to know, I have to be on camera and in class from 10 to 12 every Monday and Wednesday, or something of that nature. So we do have a separate category to highlight for students the nature of the course so that they're aware of that. And we're seeing an increasing number of those kinds of classes at the university. The last category are hybrid distance classes, which is kind of a unique hybrid in which the student must be on live synchronous video about half of the time, and the other time their coursework is completed online. So they can complete the course entirely at a distance, but about half of the time they have to be on live video, and the student needs to be aware of that requirement. So now that we know a little bit about the different types of instruction modes for our classes, what we can look at are those past DFW rates. And what we see here is the clear winner in terms of the highest pass rate and the lowest DFW rate are those traditional hybrid classes. And we can see that the online classes, either fully online or the 76 to 99% online, those do have the lowest pass rates. I took this data and I broke it out by our different campus types, and that similar trend held true. So between the Bloomington campus, the IUPUI campus, and the regional campuses, those traditional hybrid classes were the winners with the highest pass rate, and the online and almost online classes had the lowest pass rates. And again, these are undergraduate students only. You can see on this particular slide, I've dropped out the distance video, the synchronous video, and the hybrid synchronous video classes because the ends were rather small, and it's helpful here now just to focus on this small subset, really comparing on campus to the hybrid to our online versions, the two varieties of online. And I took the data over time, so I took the two really academic years worth of data, two springs and 2 falls, and I combined all of those grades together just to increase the N, and I believe there were over 1 million grades in this particular set of data, and the trends also held true. Our traditional hybrids had the highest pass rates, and the online classes had the lowest pass rates. One thing we can start to see out of this too is those online, those almost online classes, which is the far right category within each campus, there may be some pedagogical issues that we can start to discuss as a result of this data. So it's helpful to look at these and realize that maybe those almost online classes where we're teaching the students all semester long in an asynchronous format, but at the end of the semester we ask them to come to campus and take this on-campus exam. Perhaps pedagogically that's too much of a jolt for the students and they have difficulty with that. It could also be that students just can't come or didn't realize they had to come, didn't read properly all the documentation that they were given, and that's causing poor performance in those classes. So that's certainly something that we can take a look at further. But now there's one other thing that I want to look at with respect to these past DFW rates. This is back to the original slide that we started with. And when I originally went through and looked at this data, there was a mistake that I made in adding certain kinds of grades into this particular data, but I thought it was really enlightening and might help inform what's happening here. I originally thought that the DFW stood for drop, F and W. Being a faculty member for a long time, I'd never calculated these things before, and now I was in the role of doing the calculation, so I had to get clarity. But what I found was, if we add those drops into the situation, so the drops are shown here in the blue, we can see some really interesting things happen to these pass rates. And notice the drop rate for traditional hybrid classes is really very high. Now let's define what are these drops. Those drops, the reason why they're never really traditionally put in DFW rates, those are those first week drops. Those are those schedule adjustments that students make during the first week of classes where they might have signed up for 8 classes knowing they were only going to take 5, and they wanted to wait and hedge their bets and take a chance and decide what they really wanted to take, and so they drop during the first week of the semester. So when we look at students doing that, traditionally we don't let that affect the DFW rate. But there's an interesting observation to be made here that when we add in these drops, the pass rate for my in-person and my online classes almost equalizes. It's not truly equal, but they become much closer than they were. And I know as an online instructor in the past, I would have students who sign up for online classes that never show up in the class. And regardless of the number of times we email them or you remind them or you try to get to them to clean up their schedules, they stay in those online classes and kind of forget about them. I think they're easier to forget about than an on-campus class. And it might be that that lack of drop by the online student is causing an unnatural increase in the DFW rate for these online classes.
There's also potentially an element of a broader market, broader environmental issue being played out here where other institutions, if the student's already been in online education at another university or college, sometimes those drop periods can be fairly extended. There can be a hold harmless situation where a student could be enrolled for a month or even 6 weeks and drop out of a class and not have it show up on their record. Ours, in comparison, is fairly short. So this is an area where probably some more education on our part with every online student understand specifically our policies and practices might help change these numbers in a good way.
Absolutely. So I should have advanced this earlier. This is a nice comparison between the grades without those drops on the left and the grades with the drops on the right. So again, to kind of drive home that point, I think more education and more research into why this is the phenomenon, particularly for those, even the hybrids, understanding why those drop rates are so much higher than in the other situations. And again, that could be the student realizes at the last minute, this is a course where I have to come to campus half of the time and I can't do that. I have a class or I have a job that I have to get to or I have to pick up my children from school. So there's all sorts of reasons why we might see these differences. So really a nice way that the data can help inform more work that we need to do. So we're gonna, I really faded out my busted logo here on this particular myth. It is true that we do see higher DFW rates in these online classes, and I think that the data really help us with isolating a couple of areas that we can start to do some more work in this area.
And this is one thing that I'd like to kind of preview some work that we're pursuing in the Office of Online Education. So when I talked about adding some educational elements around online education for new students to the university, things like orientation, things like coaching and mentoring, things that will allow a student to have reminders and be better informed of those policies, procedures, and just have someone there to remind students, hey, we noticed that it's getting near to the end of the drop add period. We want to make sure that you've made your final course choices or that you're not having any difficulty. If you are, then we need to talk about changing your schedule. Those sorts of things and those sorts of services we think will help us change these metrics a little bit in the near future. So now we can wrap up. Those were our 3 myths. So just to kind of remind everybody sort of what we went through, the student participation in the online space, definitely feel like we busted this with 1 out of every 4 IU students taking 1 or more classes. Definitely it is a pervasive mode of education at the university. It's also not just a part-time phenomenon. It's very much important to our traditional aged and full-time students. Online student success, we think we feel pretty comfortable that we busted this myth as well, that students participating in partial online schedules, they take more credits per term, they don't really vary that much in their GPAs, they are retained at higher rates, and they receive a degree faster, if at all. So now I do want to caution there a little bit, correlation does not determine causality, so there's a lot of, we don't want to come away with you thinking that we're saying that online education is the magic bullet, but we know that it's a key indicator that it seems to be that these students are doing well in these classes and utilizing it to achieve their goals. The final area was that online course completion, and we think there's some real differences in DFW rates that we need to further investigate and wrap some services around online education to help students be prepared to avoid those nasty consequences of not necessarily getting out of a class fast enough. So with that, we'd just like to wrap up, say thank you very much for your time and attention to this presentation, and thank you very much, Sharon, for joining me today. And if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out and email us directly. We're always happy to answer questions, or even if we don't know the answer, we oftentimes like to have questions out there that we do continuing research on. So thank you very much and have a great day.